What's up, crew? Welcome to Filming in Progress, the show that takes you backstage into the world of local businesses and the people who make them shine. Join us as we welcome Vince Fowler, a transformative performance coach specializing in helping CEOs and entrepreneurs amplify their impact. Leveraging a unique blend of military discipline, team sports strategy, and ultra-marathon endurance, Vince excels in guiding leaders through complex challenges and towards substantial business and personal growth. Vince, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Aiden. Thank you.
What first drew you to coaching, professional coaching?
Oh, wow. It probably started with athletics. And getting out of the military, I went straight into sales. So I was a different flavor of sales over the course of the next 10 years. And after that, I ended up at Edge School for Athletes, just west of Calgary. And I thought I'd be an athletics coach forever. It was a dream come true. A strength conditioning coach, coaching rugby, coaching high performing athletes in the high school level. It was phenomenal. And then when the economy changed in 2008 and 2009, my contract, private schools are 1-year contracts, it didn't get renewed. So eventually I put my resume in space up online, right? And said, I'm a business coach, not knowing that it's a real industry, nor a real term. Had no clue. I just kind of pulled these two words out of the sky. I had a background in sales getting out of the military. So I know how to coach and I understand business. What happens if I put those two together? So I fell into it, literally. Not very cool, but that's how I got it.
Was your first client somebody you knew, or was it somebody online, or how'd that go?
First client was referred to me by a former principal of the school, and it was a food product. And I barely understood business as a whole. I understood sales, I understood marketing, I understood business development. I understood some aspects of leadership just from my military background, but I knew nothing about launching a food product. And the benefit for me was I worked at a firm. And so everybody around me did. So I leveraged the firm coaches heavily. There was 4 other coaches in the firm. So first client was a referral. Second client, we had an event that we hosted, just education, information. And out of that drew some curiosity from the audience, and that led to a second client quickly, which was a company that packed your home ready to move. So they put everything in a box, so when the movers came, it was all prepared. Help you unpack if you want. And so it was two founding ladies, and it kind of took off from there. I'd spent most of my life after the military in business development, so that part wasn't the hard part. Hard part was playing catch up with people who were trying to build a business in real time, and me catching up a lot.
Right on.
Yeah.
Do you feel, so your childhood, you grew up on a farm, is that correct?
Yeah, hobby farm.
Yeah.
There was always an animal, outside of a cat or a dog, there was always a cow, a pig, something, a chicken, to the point where we had we had probably 10 cows, a milk cow, lots of chickens, lots of pigs, lots of turkeys, few pet rats.
There you go.
So, yeah.
All the things.
So all milking, feeding, butchering, eating, collecting, did it all.
Do you feel like the challenges of growing up on a farm helped guide to kind of the problems that you solve today?
That's an interesting question. The thing with a farm is it's always on. It's 24/7. I mean, think about it. If you have 2 milk cows out back and pigs, cows you can just leave them to the pasture, but a milk cow needs to be milked twice a day. Pigs need fed every day, and chickens, ultimately we got to collect the eggs or they'll very likely eat them. So it can't just be left. And a business is the same. There's so many moving parts and nothing can really be neglected. You might be able to put a couple things on autopilot maybe, but ultimately it requires your day-to-day attention or delegation. So not a lot. Do you want to milk our cows if we want to go on a 2-week holiday? We had no friends.
And then, so what did you do after the farm? Did you go to school?
Straight into the Army.
Straight into the Army.
My stepfather had a business. My mother had a, let's call it a side hustle, short of looking after the kids. She was always making something, selling something. So, but in both cases, it took them away from us. So I was never really attracted to business, but I was attracted to the military from a young age, from about 11 on. So I went straight into the military. I was thinking I was looking for, pick fights with bullies, but I didn't learn until years later. I was looking for safety, connection, family, brotherhood. So, yeah.
How long were you in the military for?
7 years. Thought I'd be there forever. And 2 engagements, the first one being 3 years, the second one being 4 years engagement. At the time, the Liberal government, doesn't really matter who's in charge, Liberal or Conservative, both federal parties have had their way of building or tearing down the military to fit budgets. And at this time, it just happened to be a Liberal government that was kind of cleaning the house. So when they disbanded our unit, my engagement was coming to an end anyway. So it was either re-engage for 13 years or try my luck on Civvy Street. So I rolled the dice on Civvy Street.
You said you learned these things much after leaving the Army, right? Before getting in.
Yeah.
How?
Purely by accident. There's a lot of accident in life. So I started coaching in 2011, joined the firm initially as business development, and within a year I was coaching. But so that was back in, and then started my own practice in 2012. So it was Christmas 17, right? 5 years later, my wife got me an Ancestry DNA kit. And it was in the results of that I learned that my father wasn't my father. A couple other little surprises. And it sort of really rocked my identity. There's actually a daughter in the first marriage that I found out wasn't my daughter. So my entire identity was just blown up. I had no idea who I was. So trying to use my own coping skills from my profession of coaching to athletics and how do we cope during a game that we're kind of not in control of. It just really wasn't working. It was starting to unravel. And so I ended up all super lucky, again, purely by accident, ran into somebody who we had a common friend, mutual friend. He's ex-military. And he just sort of noticed something during our conversation and said, how'd you like to speak to a team at the OSI clinic? OSI is operational stress injury, and team was basically code for psychologists. So I went to meet them somewhat reluctantly, but also open-minded. And after a very raw experience, I figured it was just, we were so close to Remembrance Day that emotions were raw. But I came back 2 weeks later and read a 17-page report, post-traumatic stress. And so that was about a year and a half after that whole Ancestry DNA disclosure. What was meant to be a shits and giggles gift turned into what the hell? So no regrets, painful journey, but it was very much in that painful recovery that I realized that while I thought I was joining the Army to pick fights with bullies, having grown up only child at the time, single mother at the time, picked on a lot, that sucks. And watching others getting picked on is even more painful to watch. So yeah, I thought if I was a soldier, no one would pick on me or my friends. So, but through the process of therapy, I learned that I was really looking for safety. I was really looking for connection and family and brotherhood. And that's exactly what the Army provided. So yeah, for the most part, it was a really good experience despite certain events. It was a really good experience.
You said that after that Ancestry, during that coping period, you used you tried to use some of your own coaching habits because you were already coaching at that point.
Yeah.
Was that, how was that process? I know sometimes it's easier to kind of help other people than to help yourself.
I was always a self-advocate of make progress with what you have. So for example, I played rugby in a club that only had 3rd and 2nd division. We didn't compete in 1st division, and I wanted to play for Calgary. The traditional way is leave the club, go to a club that has a 1st division team, make that team, and then be eligible for selection. So I was thinking, well, that doesn't make sense to me. If all the aspiring athletes want to play at that level leave the club doesn't improve, the club gets weaker. So how do I make the leap without having to leave my club? So I started looking for sports psychology, nutrition, personal training, all these things to develop myself as an athlete. The coach would take care of the game. I would take care of me, the athlete. So the same in this case. I knew I was struggling. I couldn't figure out, didn't really know why at the time, but I knew that sleep was important, exercise was important, a variety of other interventions were important. So I was just using those, but it got to the point, it's kind of like running on empty. You use every trick in the book to get your car to the fuel station, coast on the downhill. And so all of a sudden I was like, I was doing all these mental gymnastics, and at the same time deteriorating. So yeah.
Interesting. So you went from then coaching sport to coaching business.
Yeah.
Was that transition easy, or did it come I know you said there were similarities, but.
Easy in that they're both games. Simon Sinek, quoting James Carsey's work, says it really well. Like, sport is the finite game, right? Known players, fixed rules, and the objective is to win. And when two finite thinkers show up and they go head to head, the system is stable. And then the infinite game is the players are known and unknown. The rules are flexible, changeable, and the objective is to stay in the game. As long as you have time, money, energy, resources, you get to play the game. So the system is stable when you have two finite thinkers going head to head. And the analogy is the Cold War was the infinite game. NATO versus the Soviet Union. So very stable process, very stable game, until the Soviet Union ran out of resources. They couldn't play the game anymore. So did we really win, or did they just couldn't participate anymore? So business is business a finite game, or is business an infinite game? And I would submit that business is very much the infinite game. So the goal isn't to necessarily win, the goal is to stay in the game. So in athletics, what's the scoreboard look like? In business, what does the scoreboard look like? So that to me was clear as day. It made perfect sense. I just had to pay attention to different data. It was less about, did we win the business? Did we lose the business? It was more about, what are the factors that contribute to our ability to stay in business? So that was the easy part. The hard part was thinking that every business is the same. And while maybe the mechanics of it are, customers, average dollar sale, average transaction margin, and all these things, every business has those. But 150 different business owners I've worked with, maybe more, maybe less, 150 different ways to do the business, right? There's no such thing as the compensation plan. There's no such thing as the right way, wrong way to hire. There's just a way. So letting go of some of that finite thinking, letting go of some of that fixed thinking was actually the hard part. I'd learned something, okay, that's the way, only for it to be contradicted in this business, and this business, and this business. So now it's like, you do your business. What's the scoreboard? What's the relevant data we're trying to keep track of?
Do those variables that obviously change business to business and person to person, does those things make your job harder?
Not anymore. I've been doing this for 13 years with the hope to do it forever. I really enjoy my work, really, really enjoy my work. The things that are hard are the things no one talks about. The loss of a son. If you just talked about business, the gist of business, again, what's our ad budget? What's our marketing budget? What's this budget? What's that budget? What rent is a percentage of revenue? What's the threshold? Whatever those metrics are. Those are kind of the easy things, because it's basically a big giant math problem. But someone calls and says, hey, I can't make our coaching session. No problem. My son was in a car accident. I'm on my way to the hospital. I'm on my way to the hospital now, only to find out 5 days later, now they're going to a funeral. No one in my coach training told me about those experiences coming down the pipe. Attempted suicide by one of my client's staff. Divorce. I've seen multiple divorces. Some have been really amicable. Some have been unbelievably destructive. Not just on the two adults getting divorced, but on the children, the fallout on the children. Yeah, a lot of stuff like that. That's the hard part, because there's how do you prepare for that? Like it's such an emotional experience, and how to not, actually this was the mistake I made. Emotional empathy is really good. It's just that we feel what they feel. Cognitive empathy is I understand what you feel, and I didn't know there was a difference. And compassionate empathy is I get it, I know what you're going through, I've been there, and here's a way out. I was only aware of emotional empathy. I felt all the pain that they felt, and that was really hard. I didn't know how to get out of it at times. So, yeah, and it can also be weaponized. So for example, a really simple example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Calgary Russian churches were being vandalized. Someone's empathy for Ukraine was so powerful that they vandalized a Russian church in Calgary who has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. So when someone comes up and says, this person has wronged me, this person has hurt me, that one has to be really aware of how that empathy for the client in this case doesn't get used against the person who they feel has wronged them. That's where that was the hard stuff I had to learn all on my own, because it's not in coach training. Not 13 years ago anyways.
Is there a line when you're dealing with coaching? You know, like some people specify business coaching, personal coaching, anything in between, performance coaching, whatever the case may be. Do you find that those all blend at some point if you're truly trying to help the person that you're coaching?
Everything blends for sure. So 13, 14 years ago, I had joined a company called Business Edge Coaching, and their methodology was Action Coach. Action Coach had been around for about 17 years at this time. So, but think of it in the context of law or medicine. In the beginning, if you were a doctor, you were also a vet, you were also a therapist, you were all these things. Like, if you ever watched Little House on the Prairie, he traded chickens for medicine. So law in the beginning was just law. And now we have multiple disciplines of law. The same with coaching. Coaching is very much diversified. Athletics was probably the spearhead of it all, would be my guess. And business finally, eventually adopted, but it probably came at it more from a consulting perspective and then adapted into a coaching style. So today, the ability to understand how the business works, what makes this business function, that's really important to know. How does it earn money, keep money, reinvest money, get money that it doesn't have? Like, understanding all those is really helpful. People are different. I'm not a big fan of labels, but different generations show up differently, and neither is good or bad. They all bring their advantages. Like, whoever hires my kids, my son has so much experience on YouTube that he has self-taught what my wife went to a university for a 4-year degree to achieve. Our daughter has an interest in art that we just watered, and an interest in athletics, an interest in music. So she can draw, she can paint, she can do a rear naked choke, and she can tackle with the best of them, right? She has all these interests. So whoever hires, our kids we raise them to ask questions, challenge problems, think differently. My generation was told to comply, and we'll see you when the lights come on. So there's advantages in both. There is really no one. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
That's great. Yeah, I want to explore the when these things happen to your clients' lives, the curveballs, let's call them.
Yeah.
How do you separate? You mentioned that it's difficult to separate yourself from those things. Obviously, you're heavily invested in your clients. How do you go about separating those things? Because ultimately, I imagine it can be quite consuming.
Focus on the controllables. What is mine to control? What is theirs to control? I can only play my lane. Really, it's incredible. That doesn't mean it's not painful, to watch someone go through a really significant challenge, and I don't have the ability to step in and help. It's not like being in the playground where a friend of ours is getting picked on and we can go over there and intervene. The government, a perfect example is the government made decisions regarding COVID. This company had to close down completely. This company had to modify occupancy. This company had to work from home. It was kind of different for just about everybody. And then it didn't matter how big the organization was, where it was a 3-person company or a 700-person company. Every owner was dealing with the same stuff. How the hell do I make payroll? And to watch them go through their own painful journey, for me, it was a huge, huge, huge education. And I can only focus on what I can control. Same for them, and try to ask the most helpful. Try to ask the most helpful question. Yeah.
Does that line get easier over time, or is it always just as complicated?
It does if it's about them. If I'm trying to sit here and sound really smart, and I'm going to make some mistakes. But if I just lean in and be really curious, then things go where they go. It doesn't mean I can't provide solutions, not necessarily the same thing as advice, but if I make it about me, nothing's helpful. If I make it all about them, then the questions are very easy because it's just, I'm listening. I know what they're going, I have an understanding of what they're going through. I have an understanding of where they're going, what's their vision, what's their mission, what are their values, what are their objectives, what's important to them, what are the outcomes they're hoping for. The questions, just because there's so many reps, the question that needs to be asked next is usually it's already there. I don't have to think about that part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned curiosity in there, which I know is one of your core values.
It is.
How do you maintain that, and how do you practice that throughout every session?
Good question. See, look how you're doing curiosity well. I think it's the same thing. If I make it about them and just lean in and don't worry about what the answer might be, don't worry how stupid I might look. I mean, early days in my coach training, this guy, his name is Bruce, he was a former long time beekeeper, apparently. And he says, bees they don't talk to us, but they do communicate. So you have to be really curious with bees. And I was 41. I was super naive. I was a lot of ego, but he was right. Just lean in and listen and observe. And being curious is easy. And again, he said, just get really good at asking stupid questions. I think a better statement could have been, get comfortable. Not good at. How do you get good at behaving stupid? But there's this ego that we all have that, wow, if I ask this question a third time, how much of an idiot do I look like? If we're listening, we're not forgetting. And maybe that next question just needs a little nuance to get the answer that is coming. So knowing when it's overused is also important. Like the enemy of curiosity is obtrusiveness. Like when do we not need to be curious? That takes some lessons. Got to fall off the cliff on that one a few times first. But it's all reps. Like coaching's a science. It's an experience. The more reps a person gets, the better they get at it. Just like anything. Look at what you've got set up here, right? Not your first rodeo, lots of reps. And it just gets better and better and better. So.
Do you find there's a barrier for people to come and approach coaches for the first time?
13 years ago, yeah, for sure. Today, less. People would say in the beginning, 2010 is when I started. I don't need a coach. There's nothing wrong with me. That was a really common answer. Now it's, or coaching, what are you going to teach me? You've never ran a business. That was another one. Now the science of coaching has definitely proved itself out. Large corporations like Shell, Imperial Oil, for example. A friend of mine, when he first got his job with Imperial Oil, the first thing they did is says, this is so-and-so, and they're your coach for the next 2 years. We want you to be successful here. So they employ coaches. They're employed by the corporation. In small business, they're a little bit in some ways they move faster than big business, but in other ways they're slow to adapt because they're thinking as well, coaching's expensive, who is this person? They're not used to being vulnerable, let's say, or their understanding of vulnerability is skewed. Today it's very, very different. Today is, okay, I need a coach. Where do I get a coach? What's the coach I need? Again, back to different disciplines of coaching. So that's way more common today. And we also have business owners of all companies, big and small, advocating for coaching. So that it's never been harder to be a coach. It's also never been easier to be a coach. It's a funny dynamic, funny paradox.
Why do you say it's never been harder?
Because we're so isolated. There's not a lot of firms. I was really fortunate. I joined a firm, at the time, 5 established coaches. Just as I was coming in, another one was going out. So, and they all had massive experience. They were in a firm. So it was easy for me in that if I had a question, I could just phone any one of those coaches. Hey, here's the situation I'm in. I could bring that coach to an existing client call. But when someone wants to, is there a firm in a person's community? But a lot of the firms that exist right now that I'm aware of are not necessarily employee coaches. They're all kind of under contract. So on the website, it looks like, hey, we have 17 coaches in our agency, in our firm. But they're all independents and they all get a percentage of the sale, which is fine, but it's not, and they're all spread. Oh, look, we're in every province. Yeah, but you still work from home. You're still isolated. So it's that isolation that makes it really difficult. Where do you go to for mentorship? Where do you go to just to bounce ideas and off-gas the day's challenge? So we had a physical office. We only functioned in Calgary. We had a meeting every Monday. We had quarterly offsites. Like it was a brick and mortar business. I was really fortunate in that context.
So you've got your client in the room. They've shed the ego enough to show up and reach out, and now you've got them there. Is there another barrier that's that vulnerability aspect to be able to get to the next level? Because I feel like what we're taught is that to break a barrier, to learn something new, to be up into something, you have to be more vulnerable, and there has to be trust established, right? Are there certain tactics, that sort of thing, that you take to get past that, and so that where you can start doing the real work?
I nerd out on social science. So one of the challenges is the word vulnerability gets thrown around a lot, which is good. It's good. But very few people know what it means. What does it mean to be vulnerable? We've experienced vulnerability in ways that are inspiring. We've also experienced vulnerability in ways that are actually kind of gross, kind of off-putting, kind of repelling. And we don't know what the difference is. It's Brene Brown's research that came out and said vulnerability is a function of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Vulnerability is not necessarily oversharing. Vulnerability is not necessarily, it's not sharing from a place of an open wound, at least in the context of coaching someone through a process, right? Like, yes, I can go to my therapist and I can be very raw and share from an open wound. That's therapy and that's fine. Coaching's not the same thing. So some people say, I need to be more vulnerable. What do you mean by that? Well, and only to find out that they've been oversharing. Or they think that tears is a requirement for vulnerability. And I'll be the first one to cry. I love crying. I think it's great. I've cried a lot for lots of reasons. And, probably starting with my kids, love them to death. But requirements, crying is not a requirement to show vulnerability. Just, hey folks, I've made a decision. It's risky. I'm uncertain about it. And I feel quite uneasy about this idea. Well, I've done the math and I think it's going to work. There's obviously a chance it won't. And I need you guys to execute this plan. I just hit on all three. So, and so that's one of the challenges. Just kind of, so there's some education, which I'm totally fine with and I like. big social science nerd. Yeah.
Do you find that it has to be reciprocated? So to get to that level with somebody, is it possible that it's one-sided, or is it always, I'll give you something, you give something back?
Oh, yeah. I actually just asked this question to some colleagues of mine here last week. I said, how vulnerable are you as a coach in session with a client? And I phoned a past client, Anne, lovely human. And I said, hey, how well do I do vulnerability? There's, you're the owner of your company. Okay. So you get to, owner or, sole proprietor, not sole proprietor rather, but owner or partner. Leadership sets the example. However vulnerable our leadership shows up gives permission to everybody else. Leadership sets the standard on what does vulnerability look like. And so as a coach, I'm more than happy to share mistakes I've made or experiences of mine, whether it's in session or out of session. So the first time I went and did it was a 50-mile ultra. I emailed a variety of people, some close family, clients, friends, and I figured it was going to take me 20 hours to do this race, and I figured divide that by 90. That's how many notes I want to collect. So I emailed that many people, and I said, I'm about to do this race. It's my furthest distance. Could you send me a note of encouragement, a math problem, a joke, a riddle, or something that I can just play with for 90 minutes while I run? And every 90 minutes, I'm going to open up one of these notes. So that's another example of displaying vulnerability. I'm not in control of the outcome. I'm only in control of the process of getting to race day. So yeah, I take a gamble. I might need their notes for the whole race. In my last race, I only got to 74 kilometers out of 160. So I read most of the notes after the race was over.
Which is probably encouraging for the next one, right?
It is, yeah. And just as happy, well, maybe not happy in the moment, but hey, I didn't finish. So I'm going to save your note for the next race or something like that.
Do you draw comparisons between running or any sort of sport? I mean, we talked about sport specifically, but running and business.
Yeah, I have a whole journal of notes, and it just says the correlation between running a business and the business of running. And there's so many correlations. I could pick any sport, but running is my sport today. And what are the myths of business? And what are the myths of running? Like, one myth of running is that it's a solo sport, but it's not. It's very much a team sport. I have a race crew, my wife. Sometimes my kids participate in that. I have an athletic therapist, I have a physiotherapist, I have a chiropractor, I have a nutritionist, I have an exercise physiologist that I see a couple times a year. Not to mention a run coach. And then I also have friends that I run with here and there. And then also there's all the competitors. On paper, we're all competing. And while there's only one winner on race day, if anybody watches people finish a marathon and watch how many times, regardless of their time, how many people cheer when they cross the finish line, like, they are celebrating a big win. And I certainly was too when I crossed my very first ultra. So the competitors on course are sometimes our biggest advocates. And in Calgary in business, for example, anywhere in business really, but you have peer advisory groups. And in some case you have, there's a client is in tech. There's of another client who's also in tech, and they cheer each other on, so it happens in business too. But yeah, there's no sprinting in business, not for long. It's not sustainable. Just like an ultra, you can't sprint your way. Usain Bolt cannot sustain that pace for 50 miles, right? Mm-hmm. Not possible. So sprint when you can, and which is usually the last 100 meters. But it's managing the pace, managing cash flow, managing nutrition, managing energy. Nutrition plays a role in business, plays a role in sport. Sleep plays a role in both. Pharma plays a role in both. Exercise plays a role. Knowing the numbers, knowing the data plays a role in both. You can't run without data, and you can't run a business without data. So Yeah.
We talked about how everybody's unique challenges are unique. You know, they're different. Every business's challenge, everybody's individual challenge, et cetera. But do you ever find commonalities between those challenges and how maybe the approach that you take in coaching people through?
For sure. You know, client 1 will have a challenge, and 2 and 3 have already figured it out. Hey, so without sharing what's not mine to share, but at least the process of solving the problem, and it could come out of a completely different industry. Very real examples I use is, if I understand correctly, Steve Jobs had a real hard time getting the color consistency in the iMac. He had a hard time getting that color consistency right, and I jokingly say he met with Jolly Rancher. He met with a candy company, and that, you know, the consistency in that candy always coming out this color every time helped him solve that problem in the iMac. And of course, everyone knows Henry Ford. He figured out how to construct a car on an assembly line by observing how animals were deconstructed in an abattoir. So sometimes the greatest insights come from parallel business in the same industry, but often a very, very different industry altogether.
Do you find that people don't often know where to look to kind of solve their problem?
That's very common, because most business owners have a very real drive to solve problems, but it's a head down, ass up approach. I just got to grind. I got to figure this out. I got to hustle, whatever the narrative is. And they don't pop their head up for air. So when they do, then they start to notice, but it's really common. Probably, I would say it's more common early days, but again, who knows? People are like, I want to do this right, so I'm going to consult with all my friends who are in business. But there's always a point in time, and sometimes repeated, where a business owner is just, you know, puts the blinders on and thinks that they have to just, and they miss everything around them. And we've all done that. I mean, I've done that in athletics, I've done that in marriage, I've done that in parenting, and I've definitely done that in business. So
you've been doing this for a long time, and it's clear you're passionate about it, and it's also very clearly a complicated industry. You know, you're dealing with feelings, you're dealing with people that are drastically different every day. It's not as simple as an assembly line, let's say. What drives you to continue doing what you do?
I just figured this out. There's a performance coach out in New York, Todd Herman, actually from Canada, somewhere Saskatchewan, Alberta, I forget. But anyways, he coaches athletes and business owners. He talks about 4 different motivations. Trauma is one. Self-expression is another. Those are the 2 that work most for me. In the beginning, it was very much trauma was motivating my progress, and self-expression, how far can I go? But there's also altruism, and there's also destiny. So some people out there, 50 Cent, the musician 50 Cent, very much destiny driven. Maybe even, you know, there's a number of artists we can all think of. It's my destiny to achieve this. It's my destiny to, Elon Musk might be very destiny driven, right? It's my destiny to put life on Mars. For me, while it's nice to be altruistic here and there, it was pure trauma. And that definitely transitioned into how far can I go? There's a great quote by John Maxwell, a leadership author, and he said, in the beginning, it was how long will this take, you know, to be successful, to hit this milestone, that milestone. And then one day I just said, you know, forget how long will it take, and just let's reframe the question to how far can I go? So that was a podcast years ago, 5-6 years ago, I know I was in the gym, I know I was working out, and I know I hit rewind a couple times on that podcast. So yeah, how far can I go? I should be a statistic. My childhood was so abusive. I should have chased drugs and alcohol to relieve the pain. I made a few mistakes in the Army. I should not have survived a couple events. Those 2 alone should have made me a statistic, but here I am. So yeah, now it's very much how far can I go? Look how far I've come, and how far can we go?
Awesome.
Yeah.
How much play, I mean, now that you understand it, I'm sure you kind of take that into consideration in everything that you do, you know, your past traumas and that sort of thing. When you first started, it seemed like that wasn't the case, right? You started coaching before you kind of realized that you were looking for brotherhood in the Army, for example.
Yeah. I didn't know that my industry existed, actually. I didn't have the qualifications to be a sales manager. I knew I liked people. I'd spent, post-military, I'd spent 9 years in business-to-business sales. And 4 years in athletics, coaching athletes. I knew that I liked coaching, and I kind of fell in love, re-engaged with business. And so I knew those two things, but it just sort of, yeah, it was just, there's a lot of luck for me. I was just met the right people, read the right books, and by right, I mean right for me. There is no right book. There's no right person. Just met the right people for me. And my own curiosity and neuroscience, neuroplasticity, social science, organizational psychology. I just kept reading and reading and reading and seeing myself in the mirror in a lot of these things, and just, you know, really evolved and still am. So I couldn't imagine my future at all if we went back 15 years, let alone 20. I just never would have guessed.
Human connection is another one of your values.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's, you know, we've talked about that extensively without even directly talking about it. But do you feel like, you know, what you got maybe when you were coming out of the military was human connection, and maybe obviously some other things as well, and that's also now what you're giving back to the people that are your clients?
In the military, we're heavily reliant on each other to get through hard things. Basic training, for some, was exceptionally hard. For me, I had experience in cadets, so I already knew how to iron a uniform, polish my boots, make a bed. But the hard parts about basic training almost exclusively were solved with some form of connection, a brotherhood. Men and women in basic training. Infantry was all men. Infantry school, jump school was all men. We relied on each other heavily to make progress. And in some cases, we were all competitors. We're all going to jump school competing for a finite number of slots in the Canadian Airborne Regiment. So just as encouraging as them to participate, and hoping that I'm the one that gets selected to go to the regiment. So same in business. If we could all learn that we are far more better together, even as competitors in our own industry, than we are apart, we would make massively more progress. People, not all business owners, but some will definitely resist hiring because they think, well, I got to train that person, and are they going to be as good as me? Like I'm really good at this. But how do they scale if they don't hire? And how do they? There's a coach, Dan Sullivan, who founded, him and his partner Babs founded Strategic Coach, and he wrote a book along with Ben Hardy, who's a psychologist, called Who Not How. That's another lesson that took me a long time to figure out. Owners often think that they have to know all the things there is to know about building their business, but it's not true. We have to hire the who already brings the how to the situation, right? And so in athletics, it makes perfect sense. Well, we need a sports psychologist and a physiologist and a nutritionist. No one's the exact same person. Like no one person can do all three things. So if it makes sense in athletics, why do we do the opposite in business? So connecting with others, learning from, finding more people who know the how, not be afraid to talk to quote competitors, not to be afraid to talk to past customers, or just people in general, like have no agenda. I don't need you to be my client, but I do have a question because you own a business. Could we spend some time talking? Yeah, connection's better. Like we have a saying in our family, we're better together. So no matter how hard things get, someone's mad at somebody, we're still better together.
In your experience working with clients, is that idea often met with resistance?
For sure. Yeah, because remember, we're all a function of our environment. And if someone grows up in an environment where, this group of people is the out group and they're bad, and this group is the in group and they're good. Not to make this political, but what if our political leadership said, hey, here's the problem we're trying to solve, and pull in different members and say, how do we solve this problem? We happen to be the party in charge, but we need everyone's thinking on this. Who has an interest in solving this problem? I don't care if it's a red, blue, or orange tie that shows up in the meeting, but instead we get this polarization, which is not helpful. It's not helpful at all. So I think we could all be much better if we just, hey, drop the ego and how do we solve this together?
Is that easier said than done?
If you let go of the ego, yeah, it's easy to do. If you're not attached to the outcome, it's easy. If someone's attached to the outcome and they have a scarcity mindset, then it can be very difficult. I think Formula One's a fantastic example of business in some ways, because the athletes, the drivers, they will talk shop, and then they'll go compete on track, and then off track they'll talk about, okay, these tires, collectively they have an opinion about Pirelli's tires, or collectively they have an opinion about certain circumstances, in some cases social movements. A race, and I think it was Jakarta, where they didn't feel safe because there was a terrorist attack just within kilometers of the course. Like, is this race even safe enough to pull off, let alone the safety of the fans, let alone us? So if you're not attached to the outcome and just, hey, what helps us make progress, I think it is easy. But if it's all me, scarcity, their failure is my win, it can be hard to reach out and talk. And that was my own experience. I was very much against, I had some ego in the beginning about, if you weren't this type of coach focusing on these types of problems, what real value did you ultimately bring to the client? I was deeply wrong, deeply misguided.
What ultimately helped you get over that hump?
Therapy. I mean, think of an onion just being peeled layer after layer after layer. Sooner or later, the stuff that I thought that mattered didn't. So that was my path. I think some sort of, maybe some sort of catastrophic mistake just kind of makes people humble. But, the fastest way to get over, I mean, it's a silly example, but if anybody has any self-conscious thoughts around being naked, join the army, because there's 50 guys, 8 shower heads, and we've got 5 minutes to get in, shower, and get back out on the parade square in 5 minutes. All of a sudden, I no longer cared, right? And so there's got to be some sort of exposure therapy, so to speak, to strip away the ego and to be vulnerable, to make to realize that, hey, I can't do this by myself. Even doesn't matter if it's a run, a business, a parent, doesn't matter.
Would you say that therapy can help anybody and everybody?
No. Therapy doesn't work if you don't want it. Nothing works if we don't want it. Even hypnosis doesn't work if the person doesn't want to be hypnotized. Therapy is a helpful methodology. While it doesn't work for everyone, it does work. So it's probably more the therapist versus the methodology. And that's the same with coaching. Not everybody needs a coach. Not everybody wants a coach. And hiring a coach because someone else said you need one is usually not a result to get excited about. So we need active participants. And I was very much in therapy, very much an active participant. I was not happy with where I was. I knew where I wanted to go, and I knew what it would take to get there, or at least I knew that it would take a lot of work to get there. So let's get at it. As painful as this journey is, and emotionally and physically painful, it's also necessary and unavoidable for forward progress. So
That roadmap, starting to understand how important that is of visualizing where you want to be rather than just being stuck in the place that you are. Is that what you're talking about when when you can't help somebody who doesn't want to be helped, so maybe they have to have that roadmap, or can people be helped to see and develop that roadmap?
I think people can be helped to see. What would be a good example? Just even for myself, there's this story that's been used a lot about business owners being on a treadmill, working real hard and going nowhere. It's a commonplace, and part of it is because I don't think they've spent any time wondering what the future could be. What do I want in my future? Well, I want to do I'll use an athletic example. I want to do a 200-mile race. Well, this is my current state. Okay, the key question would be, well, what would have to happen if this is the reality? What would have to happen for this to happen? So we have to ask ourselves, we have to ask our clients, what would have to happen for this to be a reality? Otherwise, we kind of stay in this perpetual hamster wheel of busy. And so some people have forgotten how to dream. Zig Ziglar said some people are dead from the neck up. They die at 25 and they get buried at 75. They've forgotten how to dream. They've forgotten how to imagine what something could be. And so they just imagine just skiing down the exact same hill, the exact same run over and over again, not realizing there's multiple hills, multiple runs on every hill. And that's just in Alberta. There's more in Canada, there's more in North America, you can go overseas. And this is why peer advisory groups are helpful. This is why travel is so helpful, because we open our eyes up. Like there's more, having clients in the US was a huge eye opener for me, because I got to see how other owners operated under the exact same protocols or circumstances. Completely different. So I had to go beyond my local area to see that, wow, there's so many different opportunities out there.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think it's so true that many business owners and everybody else alike operates with blinders on, right? Yeah. And they're just not seeing everything that's possible. If we
were to only just stay in our, let's say you never spoke to a business owner outside of Calgary. In reality, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because Calgary has 57,000 businesses that have 10 employees or less only. So you could, but what happens if you head down to San Diego or New York, or you get a chance to go to London, and cross the pond? All of a sudden you start to, using COVID as an example, we saw different jurisdictions handle and respond to a problem multiple different ways. We only saw our way in Calgary, or maybe Edmonton, or maybe Okotoks, but everybody's got an economic challenge, everyone's got a labor challenge, everyone's got a resource challenge, but how they face those challenges in different parts of North America alone is fascinating. For me, it is. It feeds my curiosity. But yeah, I'm not sure I answered that question either.
You did. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
I did, until someone explained it, what it is that made sense to me. Todd Herman again, he said, imposter syndrome, self-doubt is not real. So as soon as someone makes an absolute comment like that, you have my attention. He was sharing a conversation he had with one of his clients. The client is a professional golfer. The story I make up is this golfer's playing in Scotland, because they're referring to this. The golfer had an absolute horrific game that day in the tournament, and it was raining, it was wet, it was windy. And Todd the golfer was very frustrated. And he goes, "Don't worry, the weather is clearing up. You just didn't have a strategy for this type of weather. You're a great weather golfer. You're a great weather golfer." And so I was like, okay, what's next? So he said, you have the ability, you have the capability, you have the capacity to improve. You just didn't have a strategy. And at that time, I was reflecting on something different than business. I was actually reflecting on an approach leading up to a 100-mile race. But I said, well, that's the exact same thing for business. I have the ability to understand business. I already have a really solid understanding already. I have the capability to learn more. I'm self-employed. I choose my own hours, I choose my clients. So I have the capacity to make time for all of this. I just didn't have a strategy to run 100 miles. And I knew how to go find the answer. It was just, at that point, I didn't have a coach, so I had to go find a new running coach. The fifth element I would add that he didn't either disclose or share, or maybe it doesn't exist on his methodology, but was a really robust feedback loop. So I think everything he said plus a robust feedback loop is really helpful to make progress in anything. And so when I started to apply that thinking, ability, capability, capacity, strategy, and robust feedback loop, all of a sudden I was much more comfortable in my own skin, which was only last spring. So I'd already been in business for 12 years, really struggling with imposter syndrome. It's only in the last year that I haven't, just because of that one piece. Adam Grant has a thing talking about when competency is higher than confidence. But again, this gap in confidence is really, I go back to a function of those 5 things.
Do you coach this idea as well?
Yes, all the time. And on my LinkedIn profile, right, it says Crayola Ninja. So pre-COVID, I was always pen and paper with a client. And now, 90% of my clients aren't even in Calgary. So I use a Zoom. Over Zoom, I use an app on my iPad so I can continue to draw. So I have found certain things that I draw so many times. I was like, I need a slide for this, so I'll draw this out. But a client is like, look what I have on my phone. So that was pretty cool. I saw that a couple weeks ago. And yeah.
Awesome. You have a saying that goes, simple gets done. What do you mean by that?
Best way to describe it is the military. Government leaders will make these big decisions. We're going to go to war. Generals tell everybody downstream, we're going to war. And it's privates and corporals that load up the planes. It might be captains that fly them, but it's privates and corporals and sergeants that load them up. So simple. It's anything that's complex is hard to execute. If someone's a commission sales rep, the ones that struggle are often facing, there's a few reasons to struggle, but the ones that struggle, they're often facing really complex commission structures, commission plans. If you make a really simple commission plan that your team can understand, they'll go execute really well. If you say, this is how we load an aircraft to deploy all this gear overseas, it'll get done. Simple gets done. Complexity, we stare, how do we do this again? How do we coach this? How do we train this? How do we replicate this in different jurisdictions, different territories? It just gets hard. So yeah, keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple.
You're talking about feedback loops there for a second as well, but also debriefing, the importance of debriefing.
Yes.
Explain that to me.
The military, we call it an after-action review, after-action report. And so after an incident or a patrol or even an exercise or a full-blown operation, there's always going to be something baked in. What did we learn from? What were our mistakes? What were our errors? What were our assumptions and so on? And how do we improve on this so we can? Because the military is very process-driven. In athletics, the same thing. In athletics, we say, let's watch game tape. Anybody who plays athletics at a high enough level, where there's game tape, it's for the whole purpose of debriefing the game we just had, so we can go into the next game with a little more data. And on Netflix, there's a really great program on rugby. It's the Six Nations. And you watch these coaches run the team through their past game. This is how we did against France. Scotland, for example, we did this against France. We need to do this against Ireland. It's really, really critical to make sense of and not lose the lesson. So business doesn't doesn't always do this. We'll pick Calgary. I think there's 57,000 businesses with 10 employees or less in Calgary alone. And there's just a lot less athletics teams out there, right? So yeah, business, we're just slow to catch up. So if you're watching, do a debrief. Debrief the week, debrief the sale, debrief the event, debrief the quarter, debrief the year. You know, in our business, we take half a day to debrief the quarter, 2 days to debrief the year, prepare for the next year ahead. And that's something I encourage clients to do, or non-clients, I don't care. Just, what made sense.
Is there a strategy or a framework that you follow to ensure that that's effective and simple, maybe?
Yeah, so there's a company out there called EOS. It's an entrepreneur operating system. I tripped over them probably 6-7 years ago, maybe more. And they just gave away tools. And so I always paid attention. If there's a tool that works, I want to use it. So I'm not employed by EOS. I'm not a member of EOS. I have clients who use EOS. And so when I got up close and personal on some of these tools, some of them I just fell in love with immediately because they're just so simple. They get the job done. It'd be like on the back of Hershey's chocolate chips. There's a chocolate chip cookie recipe. It's actually pretty good. You want to make it your own and add a couple different ingredients, but for the most part, it's excellent. You'll never screw up chocolate chip cookies if you just follow their recipe. And Google it, and there's probably 1 million results on how to make chocolate chip cookies, right? So if we hit Google and how do we run an effective meeting, get get a whole bunch of hits from that one question. EOS has these tools, and that is simple. We can execute that. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to do any of this. So, yeah, some of their tools are fantastic. I don't need to reinvent anything. I just have to deploy it, just execute it because it's simple.
What's next for you?
Keep doing what I'm doing. I often ask, it's a really common question. So finish my first 50K, what's the next race? Oh, it's going to be this 50K. Finish the 50 mile, what's the next race? Oh, it's going to be the 100K. Finish the 100K, what's the next race? Well, it's the 100 mile. It's always progressing. Business is different. Business is keep doing what I'm doing, do simple better, just continue to learn. There's lots of different things I could do, but one thing's for sure, it is in the space of coaching, helping others exercise the courage to pursue life that's meaningful to them. That's my North Star. I'm a curator, the way I say it is that the exploration and curation of wisdom, past and present. That's what I do. Collect all this stuff, hand it out like Skittles to clients. But why I do it is so that others exercise the courage to pursue life that's meaningful to them. And it's a ton of fun. So,
how is that metric measurable?
In the immediate, watching people fall back in love with a business is one measurable. Watching them have better margins where it matters to them. Watching them, hey, you know what? I got to coach my kids' soccer or lacrosse. Watching a business owner say, I sat down with my number two. We finally get each other. We finally communicate in a really healthy way. And we just had a great quarter, a great year. And be clear, they did all the work, right? I was just able to participate and have a front row seat to their journey. That's super measurable. Being able to live my life that I help others coach. I'm an assistant coach on my daughter's rugby team. So I can do that. I don't have to ask anybody's permission to go do that. I can go for a run in the middle of the day. I can take a nap. I like naps. I could do them more. It's having my wife as a colleague, and watching her not only succeed, but excel and surpass me in her skill sets is not only is it measurable, but it makes everything worth it. So it's not always ones and zeros, and it shouldn't be. So,
If you had a piece of advice, maybe to yourself before you kind of found your calling or coaching, what would that be?
You'll get there when you get there. You know, the dad on Incredibles. I don't know if you, I can't remember his name right now, but the kids are in the back seat when we get there. He's like, we'll get there when we get there. You'll get there when you get there. Stop worrying about the things I can't control. Just focus on the things I can. You know, I was too worried about, honestly, I was too worried about image. I was too worried about the clothes I wore, the watch on my wrist, the car I drove, a few things like this. None of that matters. It really doesn't. And it doesn't matter to me anymore. I mean, I wear clothes I like to wear, but no one cares if I have a $250 designer shirt on, right? No one cares. I gotta hope not. So if they do, well, maybe they have an interest in fashion. But yeah, that'd be definitely one. You'll get there when you get there. You know, just stay focused, play, sleep, exercise. Yeah, yeah.
Vince, where can we send people to follow along?
Well, vincefowler.ca is the website. The website is heavily neglected. But I live on LinkedIn. It's kind of where my people are, friends, colleagues, clients, the people I'm most curious about. And from an online platform, I'm in other places, but I care most about LinkedIn in terms of online social engagement. So, and I do, I get to test out ideas, ask questions. Sometimes people answer. It's pretty good.
Have conversations.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get. Just never know. Stay curious.
Stay curious. Vince, thanks so much. There's so much to be learned about, your experience and the human connection that you talk about and everything that you mentioned. So really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. My pleasure.